Hey everyone, Malika here. Today, we're revisiting a powerful episode from our archives, one that's just as relevant today as when we first aired it. Sit back, enjoy, and we'll see you again soon.
Today, in Gaza, Eid arrives under fire.
It's so important just to be able to kind of go through the motions and the steps to feel a human again.
How do you celebrate when you're just trying to survive? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. Eid al-Fitr is just around the corner, marking the end of the holy month of Ramadan. But the Israeli bombing in Gaza hasn't stopped since the ceasefire broke on March 18th.
Our joyful moments, our gathering, all these feelings became somehow distant. Before the war, our family from abroad used to call us to share their excitement and their joyful moments with us. But now all their calls are full of concern. They always want to know that we're just okay, we're alive.
Amaran to 6 orphan children, and this is their first Eid without their fathers. This Eid, instead of waking up to the sounds of Eid prayers, they will wake up to the sounds of bombing. And instead of visiting relatives with their fathers, they will go to the cemetery to visit their fathers' graves.
Israel and the U.S. said no truce for Eid, although Egypt says Hamas agreed. And with Israel blocking all food and aid into Gaza, people are focused on avoiding starvation, mourning the loss of their loved ones, and finding a way to mark the holiday even without festivities. This year, it's not about feasting. It's about finding enough to survive.
The food system is being actively destroyed and targeted, and we saw this play out before our eyes, that even the ingredients that we were using to make these traditional dishes were at such a fast pace being completely erased.
My guest today is an author and journalist from Gaza who's lost dozens of family members in the ongoing war.
I'm Laila el-Haddad. I live in Clarksville, Maryland. I'm from Gaza, Palestine, and I'm a journalist, a writer, and the co-author of The Gaza Kitchen.
And you are hosting some children from Gaza.
I am. It was a special treat and surprise. We were informed last week that there was a family that was evacuated from Gaza via Egypt for treatment for cancer, and that the two of the siblings that weren't here for treatment but were accompanying the mother needed a host family. So, and ideally they hoped it would be someone from Gaza. So it was a really wonderful opportunity for us as well. So they've been staying with us, and it's been a lot of fun. We're both learning from each other. The 14-year-old is sort of a budding chef. And so now that he's gotten a little more comfortable, he keeps wanting to show me different spins and takes he has on traditional dishes or not so traditional dishes.
For suhoor.
Yeah. For suhoor. So this morning, he really wanted to show me how he makes Gaza-style Indomie noodles or instant, / ramen noodles. So I was like, okay, knock yourself out. Let's see what you got.
Okay. Well, Laila, welcome back to The Take. So Ramadan is almost over, which means Eid is just a few days away. And Eid is a joyous time, right? It's about coming together, especially over food. And we are talking about Gaza, but I do want to start with your table, if we could. What are you planning for Eid? Is there one dish that symbolizes this holiday for you? And maybe you could tell us how it's prepared.
The most famous dish, I would say, or most iconic dish of Gaza, particularly Gaza City, I don't want to generalize, as I've learned that this isn't as popular in other parts of the strip, would be sumagiya, sumaqiya in classical Arabic. And it's essentially a stew that's made of some kind of meat, lamb or beef, mixed together with a roasted sesame, tahina, along with chickpeas and chopped chard and a sumac water. So you kind of infuse some whole sumac berries that are very important in Palestinian cuisine. And you pour it into bowls, and you let it cool, and you distribute it to friends and family and neighbors, as a sort of gesture of giving during the holidays. And so that's what I'm planning on making tomorrow. And I think it's especially important. I like to gift it to our small Gazan community that lives here in Maryland and in the DC area more generally. And I feel like it's something that I like to do. Sometimes my mother says, why do you bother and why do you go to all this length, especially when we're seeing our homeland being erased and our people being genocided. And I think for me, it's an important gesture to uplift our community who are themselves feeling so demoralized and overwhelmed as they witness from a distance this live-streamed genocide, and just feel completely devastated and getting to this point where they feel hopeless and unable to do anything about it.
So, Sumagia, this is family food, community food, right? Basic ingredients, delicious outcomes. Yet, I imagine completely unobtainable for people living in Gaza at the moment. And that's because Israel has blocked aid and food shipments. So let's talk about the many obstacles there would be to cooking that exact same dish in Gaza at the moment. I mean, things we take for granted, like electricity, for one.
Yeah, and there was these 2 weeks or 3, 4 weeks where my family was cautiously optimistic and hopeful at the start of Ramadan. But even then, even before Israel resumed its weaponization of food and blocking all aid, even then it was extremely difficult to come by ingredients. And what was available was exorbitantly expensive, of course, which all of this speaks more broadly to Israel's longstanding control over Palestinian foodways, especially in Gaza. And when I spoke with at least one cousin in Gaza City in the north at the start of Ramadan, she said that there was no chard available, and it was really difficult to find any kinds of fresh produce, fruits, or vegetable. And meat was just completely out of the question. I think there was maybe one time in the past 17 months where they were able to eat it.
Wow.
That's not even to mention the fact that there's no power, so no cooking fuel, right? So they were eating their iftars and their suhoors in total darkness. Maybe with the light from their phone. She sent me a grainy picture of their suhoor. The children were beaming with the light. They were so excited that she found a solar-powered string lights, just to express their joy and celebration that Ramadan had begun. Nevertheless, again, to celebrate these traditions and to be able to maintain some degree of agency at a moment where Israel is trying to strip them of it. What we witnessed over the past 17 months is arguably the fastest paced destruction of a society in post-war history. They've actually destroyed over 60% of the agriculture and all of the fishing infrastructure in the entire Gaza Strip. So, of course, this means they're directly and systematically and deliberately intending to prevent Palestinians from feeding themselves and from growing their own food. And that is how also they are so quickly, like a switch, able to create a situation of starvation in Gaza.
You wrote an article on eater.com describing how people in Gaza are breaking their fast with wartime versions of traditional recipes, that it's important to keep these traditions alive no matter the conditions. Tell me about how people are innovating to still make some of their favorite food.
Yeah, so they're substituting green. The most, I would say, popular green, most widely utilized green in Gaza is chard, sennet. And that has been very difficult to come by. So for something like sumagia, they for example, be using the sorrel instead of the chard, for example. They would definitely not make it with meat. So my cousins showed me how they made this wartime version with the sorrel, without any meat, just kind of bare bones. Sesame, they were able to find a little bit of not all spices, no garlic was available, and no chilies were available either, which is another very central ingredient to Gazan cuisine. But again, they call it the wartime version, and it's so important just to be able to kind of go through the motions and the steps to feel human again, at a time again when your humanity is being erased, when your dignity, when your agency is being stripped from you by Israel.
Yeah. I mean, some of these go back to the Nakba.
Yes, that's exactly right. A lot of these traditions, the tradition of foraging, and especially for greens like purslane, betla, for example, was something that was happening, that we saw happening a lot during the Nakba in 1948. And I think a lot of Palestinians never thought that they would live to see such a moment again, and themselves live through a moment like that. And they had to learn that knowledge from the elders. I had friends who told me, we didn't know how to use hummed. We knew it was something used to make traditional dishes by our grandparents. And we were having to rely on them as transmitters of this knowledge to survive in some of the most difficult, horrific months of the starvation in northern Gaza last February and March. And now we're seeing it happen again.
Before we move on, I'd like to focus a bit more on why people are forced to make these variations to these dishes. And that's the cutting off of aid shipments. I feel like people just state this, that Israel has halted aid shipments and just move on without explaining exactly what it means. This means people are going hungry. Children are going hungry, starving. Can you try to put into words what it feels like to have a child in your life who isn't getting enough to eat?
Yes, I mean, again, I spoke at length with another cousin from my mother's side of the family. She was living in the Garara area in southeast Gaza by the border. So it's what's called sort of a hot zone, right? That entire area was one of the first to be completely destroyed by Israel and was forced to flee to the Mawasi area by the beach. She then, during the ceasefire, wanted to go back, and she created a shelter out of tarps for her 5 children because the tent couldn't withstand the elements on the ruins of her home. And I was speaking with her about, explain to me what a day for you in Ramadan was like. And she broke down in tears and said, I'm only relieved that there's one meal to provide my children during this month, because that's literally all I can afford and all I can find. And she said, I can't even light a fire to cook something hot because I'm afraid that the smoke and the light from the fire will attract the Israeli quadcopters. And she said, that's exactly what happened to my neighbor, and she was killed. And so she said, everything happens in darkness. We huddle together. And she said, I'm afraid to leave my children. Her husband is getting treatment for cancer outside of Gaza. And they're afraid, they're terrified that I won't come back and they'll be orphaned. And I'm afraid that they'll die. I'll leave and come back and find that they've been killed. Shrapnel frequently flies through her tent. Of course, there's no electricity. And she said, just the struggle to get water. This is something that she has to do every day or two, and walk an entire hour. And the child from Gaza who's staying with me told me the same thing. So this is the daily struggle. This isn't something that happens once a month or for a specific duration or period. And you have, in her case, my cousin Maryam, 5 children who are relying on you. And she said they have chronic malnutrition. Their faces are now yellow and pale. One of them has, a hypertension or disorder that he needs medicine for. She can't find. The other one, his eardrum burst from the constant sound of Israeli jets breaking the sound barrier and the bombardment. And yet she struggles to survive, and she endures. And yesterday she said, I would love if you could help me get a little bit of treats and balloons for the kids, just so that they can feel that it's Eid, so to break, this routine. This very abnormal routine. And I think this is the problem, of course, that it seems like the world has become accustomed, desensitized, that the weaponization of food is never a normal thing. And yet it's now, as you stated, almost accepted as a fact. We say it without thinking twice, right? Israel has blocked food aid.
Laila, everything you're saying is like a body blow. Each each sentence just hits you. I don't even know what to say. When you explain that, it's truly, truly terrible. And you're living through this, and the people you love are living through this every day.
And truthfully, I'm embarrassed. Sometimes I'm cooking and I'm thinking of them, and I'm embarrassed to even ask them when I want to, the reason I do it is because I think it's so important to them. And so I ask them on a daily basis, and I joke with them and I laugh with them about, what's on your iftar table tonight? What were you able to find? How are you celebrating? And I think it makes them feel special too, that they know someone is listening, because they feel like the world has abandoned them, truthfully. And they frequently tell me it makes us feel so good if we can just talk to someone about what we're going through. Because I think hope is their last refuge, right? If that's gone, there's nothing else.
More with Laila after the break. So, Laila, I was looking at the definition of genocide, and one element is the systematic destruction of a cultural group. Now, you wrote a book about Gaza's traditional food titled The Gaza Kitchen, and we actually have it here in our studio after your last appearance on The Take. Great book. Everyone should run out and get it. Delicious recipes. In your writings, you talk about how food preserves culture, and how in this moment, it can be a powerful way to push back against this systematic destruction of culture. So in that vein, I want to ask you about your aunt, Hani. Now, she taught you many of these traditional recipes, the keeper of the recipes. Tell us about her, please.
Yes, Mhani Allah yarhamha was killed in an Israeli airstrike along with her 3 adult children, my cousins and my cousin's wife, in November of 2023 in the Sheikh Rodwan neighborhood of Gaza City. And it was just a complete shock. But at the same time, I think it was, as Palestinians from Gaza and those of us, abroad, we're almost expecting, it almost, there's this sort of inevitability about it. You're kind of waiting, when will it be my turn? Who's next, on this kill list? That's kind of what it felt like. And our different community groups became just running rosters and condolence halls in a way, where every day we would see who was killed and who do we need to speak and grieve with and offer sympathies to. And I just remember thinking, I have an interview that I did with her when I was doing the research for the book, and I immediately went back, and I hadn't listened to it in years, and I poured through it like the full 2 hours, detail by detail. Details that I had overlooked before suddenly became so important. And it was healing in a way, and I was so thankful that I had this, and I was able to write something about her to honor her, which I ultimately did. But it ended in a way that I had forgotten. We were fasting just like we are now. When I did that interview, it was August. It was a very hot Ramadan in Gaza, and I was exhausted. It was a very long day. There was a heat wave, and she was showing me a variety of small traditional dishes that she had learned from my grandmother that I had never met, my paternal grandmother. Yeah. And so she herself was a transmitter of this knowledge. And it ends by her saying, but wait, let me show you the most important dish. I want to show you how your grandmother made sumagia. And I said, no, Khalto, we don't have time for that. Right now, it's almost time for sunset prayer. We all need to break our fast. And she said, please. She used to love eating it on the beach in the summers, in the hot Gaza summers. And so I said, another day. And of course, another day never came. And I always wish I could go back to that moment and, speak with her and say, you know what? We have all the time in the world now, but we won't later. So share that dish with me. And it's just one of those things I think you don't expect. I never expected things to play out this way. I never expected that the book would become a record of Gaza, that Gaza would be facing genocide, and it would become more important than I ever thought it would be in that sense. As you rightly stated, not only preserving these dishes, but I think also using sort of the act of cooking in and of itself is liberating, cooking and farming and so on, as tools of liberation in a way, and resistance to this ongoing erasure.
Yeah. Our producer, Sarí el-Khalili, who's Palestinian-American, he says that when he cooks his mom's recipes, the smell alone makes him feel like she's come back to life, that she's standing there making his favorite makluba. I'm sure you've thought about this a lot, but I'd love to ask just, why does food form such a deep connection to memory?
I think that this is universally true. It's sort of a conduit, if you will. And for those of us who maybe have not had the privilege and the opportunity to be able to live in our homeland, I was able to live between countries and visited Gaza quite frequently as a child and into adulthood. Many people have not, for various reasons. They were deprived of entry permits. They became refugees in 1948 and again in 1967. Israel prevented them from returning. And so I think it's especially important for Palestinians, and I would argue for other communities that have faced genocide and ethnic cleansing, because it does connect you to your homeland, to your family. The tastes are familiar, they're comforting, they are grounding, especially at a time when you feel like the ground is shifting beneath your feet. And as I frequently say, genocide is disorienting. And in that sense, clinging to the familiar and clinging to these tastes of home has the ability to situate you in a way that you couldn't otherwise. And it's not really something trivial. it's I think deeply intertwined with our history, with our heritage, with our present, with our future. And it also, I think, is so informed by the political, right? By Israel's, ongoing siege and blockade and longstanding occupation. The way that our cuisine has evolved in response to all of that, I think, is a testimony to our sumud, to our steadfastness, and to our rootedness to the land as Palestinians.
Yeah. Laila, this is an Eid episode, so it's not only about food, but it's also about faith. I'm wondering how the war on Gaza has changed your relationship to both. How is this holiday different for you now?
It's a really good question, especially, I think, in a time and a place where it feels, living in the West, like sort of God doesn't belong in the narrative or the discourse. But it's unavoidable if one is witnessing what is happening right now, even virtually, if one is enduring it, as my family is in Gaza during the genocide. Speaking about faith in that context is unavoidable. And for them, the first word on their mouth, anytime I ask them how they're doing, and I think this is something many people who may not even be familiar with Islam have observed, is always Alhamdulillah. Thank God. First and foremost, they say, and always in the end, Alhamdulillah. And then they'll get into, what's happening. But from their perspective, this is the ultimate trial from God, right? They're being put through a trial and to purify them is what they keep telling me. And, in so many conversations with so many people, not only friends, but family and others that I haven't even met in person, but I've gotten to know, have said to me, and you asked about how it's reshaped my faith or my relationship, I would say it's strengthened my faith. But there are moments when, of course, you feel your faith not weakens, but you start to question everything. And then somehow they become a source of strength for you, which is so unusual. And I'm embarrassed to even say that. How can someone during a genocide be a source of faith for someone who is not, right? Or inspiration, even if not faith. And this one young girl said to me, 21-year-old college student named Shaymat, she said, Laila, we understand this to be a trial that we hope to, and our, expectation, obligation is to pass this trial. But I think what many people, and she's referring, of course, to Muslims worldwide specifically, don't realize is this is a test for them as well. And I would argue humanity more broadly, non-Muslims included. How are they responding to this genocide? What are they doing in their personal capacities? Or are they just saying there's nothing we can do or it's overwhelming? Because we don't have that luxury, we on the outside. And she said, you don't have that luxury or privilege to be able to say there's nothing else we can do.
Laila, I think if everyone in the world watched this interview, they would feel completely differently. Thank you for coming on The Take today.
It was my pleasure. I know it was a very difficult conversation, but an important one.
And that's The Take. We're always listening to what you think of the show, so let us know what kind of episodes you'd like to hear more of and what you thought of this one. And if you want to catch more episodes like this, make sure you're following our YouTube playlist. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button so you stay in the loop with all things Al Jazeera English. We'll be back.